They are the two bodies who can bring peace, but what different views on peace they have. As the new Israeli cabinet sits down to its first meeting, the Palestinian Authority says it may not even be able to function under Israel's apparent one-state solution. Are the PA's days really numbered, or is there life left in the tattered roadmap to peace? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. We're all going to pull up our sleeves and get to work. With those words, the new Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu chaired his first Israeli cabinet meeting on Sunday. It could be described as a new era, certainly a more hawkish one under the right-wing Netanyahu and his ultra-right-wing Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, but inevitably the same issues are top of the agenda: peace, security, which of course means addressing the Palestinian issue. But how this government chooses to do that will be in many ways how it is defined. And in recent weeks there have been somewhat mixed signals about the Netanyahu approach. Those in turn have raised concerns, some about a too strong right in Israel, some Palestinian fears that their long-awaited statehood is now even further away than before. Let's rewind for a moment. This was Prime Minister Netanyahu after being sworn into office last week with a softer sounding stance.
Israel has always, and today more than ever, striven to reach full peace with the entire Arab and Muslim world. We do not wish to rule another people. We do not want to rule the Palestinians. Under the permanent status agreement, the Palestinians will have all the authority necessary to rule themselves.
So Netanyahu perhaps a little vague there, however, no such ambiguity from his foreign minister, Mr. Avigdor Lieberman.
There is only one document that binds us, and that is not the Annapolis summit. It has no validity.
And of course that one document that Mr. Lieberman refers to is the roadmap to peace. It was a product of the quartet, of course the US, the UN, the EU and Russia. It predates Annapolis by 4 years, but it is not that different. Both initiatives call for a two-state solution, but the roadmap is what we call performance-based. There are obligations to meet before a two-state solution can be reached. For example, the Palestinians must renounce violence, and Israel needs to end settlement activity occurring in the occupied territories. Annapolis, however, assumes the two-state solution from the outset and then requires the two sides to negotiate on the issues, things like final borders, status of Jerusalem, and those Israeli settlements. Let's talk more about all of this with our guests. In Nablus is Abdul Sattar Qasim. He is a professor of political science at Najjar University. In Jerusalem is Gerald Steinberg, head of the Department of Political Science at Bar Ilan University. And rounding out our panel in Cairo is Hassan Issa, the former director of the Israel Department at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Inside Story. Gerald Steinberg in Jerusalem, I'd like to come to you first. Let's address this Annapolis versus roadmap issue first, because you get Avigdor Lieberman saying we're not bound by Annapolis, which assumes the two-state solution from the start. But he does seem to be in favour of the roadmap, but doesn't the roadmap also call for a two-state solution? It all seems a bit contradictory at the moment.
Yeah, I think that we should grasp the positive part of the glass that's half full if we're interested in peace. Our foreign minister, Mr. Lieberman, said he was in favor of the roadmap. What he didn't like was skipping all the stages, because he said, as most Israelis feel, we shouldn't have a Palestinian state and still leave all of these complications and potential for violence to continue. So let's go through the roadmap. Frankly, many of us were surprised that Lieberman did endorse that, and there's a lot to be done and said with that. The essential issues for Israelis are an end to Palestinian violence. That hasn't changed. It doesn't really make any difference if we're talking about Annapolis or the roadmap or Camp David or Oslo. Israelis want to know that when there's a peace agreement, it's really a peace agreement, that we're not going to have calls for right of return of refugees flooding Israel with millions of Palestinians, means no more Israel. We're not going to have continuing violence and claims on Jerusalem. There's going to be an acceptance. The Jews have been in Jerusalem for 3,000 years. We have to accommodate that. We have to work together on that. It doesn't make any difference if we're talking about the roadmap or Annapolis. Those are essential agreements for Israelis. And what Lieberman is saying is, even as many people describe him as someone who's on the far right, There's a lot to be worked on there. And he did not denounce or say there's no two-state solution. It's going to be a difficult process to convince Israelis the time is right for that, but it's certainly very much on the table. Let's see if we can get these negotiations going, is what Lieberman is saying. You may not like me, you may not like my background, but I'm up there to play ball in terms of negotiations.
On a symbolic level, though, if I can put it that way, which may not be seen as quite as important, but on a symbolic level, it's perhaps, to paraphrase someone like Condoleezza Rice, perhaps it's not helpful that he would come out, that a foreign minister would come out and say, this process, which was supposed to kickstart everything, we don't really adhere to it, and we're not really too worried about it.
Well, let's admit we're talking about politicians, and politicians are politicians everywhere, particularly in democratic societies where they have to fight and they have to explain why they're better than the government they replaced. The government they replaced had this Annapolis process. It was going for about a year and a half. It produced nothing visible, not for Israelis, not for Palestinians, a lot of photo ops, a lot of conversations, a lot of very vague terms, but none of us really know what was done in this Annapolis process. Israelis keep seeing terrorism. We had a child that was unfortunately tragically bludgeoned to death by a Palestinian terrorist just a couple of days ago. Those are the sorts of things Israelis say, well, what is Annapolis getting us? So perhaps what we have to do now is look at the solid elements of this, look at this step by step. And the fact that one politician or group of politicians who replaced an earlier group of politicians said we want a slightly different version of this, that doesn't really change the situation on the ground. It doesn't really change the challenges. The challenges have stayed the same for 60 years. We all know what they are. We know how to deal with them. Now people, as Mr. Netanyahu said, need to roll up their sleeves. I think it's important for Palestinians, for Egyptians, since Ambassador Issa is on the line here, for the Arab world, for the Arab League, to grasp at the positive elements of this and saying, hey, this government really isn't that much different than the previous governments. The names have changed, but these people are also people we can do business with.
Abdul Sattar Qasim in Annapolis, do you take what Gerald Steinberg is saying there, that the two-state solution is in fact not dead under Lieberman and Netanyahu, and that there is still a chance for peace even with a more right-wing government?
Well, let me first mention that your guest talked about the Palestinian terrorism, and he didn't talk about Israeli terrorism. That's not academic. If we want to run after the definitions of the United States or Western Europe or the diplomats, that's not going to be very helpful. Because if we want to seek solutions, we have to be even-handed. We have to look at things from the different angles. The Palestinians shoot, the Israelis make mass destruction and mass killings. So we have to be careful about labeling Palestinians as terrorists and forgetting the Israelis, what they are doing. Now, on the other hand, now concerning the two-state solution, now what the Israelis and the Americans are actually concerned about is the establishment of a Palestinian entity that works as a security agent for Israel. If that doesn't happen, then that entity will not be established. They are not talking about a real Palestinian state. They are talking about an entity. What I mean is that they are not talking about a Palestinian army, a free, open borders with the Arab countries, a free diplomatic relations with others, and so on. They are just talking about Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, receiving some financial aid from the donating countries, and just working as collaborators to help the Israeli security, to work against their own fellow Palestinians. So I never thought that they are serious actually about talking about the two-state solution. Now, with the change of the government, I don't think that there will be any significant change in the Israeli politics. Netanyahu was a prime minister.
Hassan Issa over
and he made
in
a
Cairo.
coalition. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I know we've got a bit of a delay on the satellite. I want to go to Hassan Issa in Cairo. What do you make of what's been said here and what you've heard so far? Perhaps this government isn't as different as the last one. Perhaps it is more different. Perhaps it's more right-wing. What do you, when you see it in its entirety, what do you make of the prospects for two-state solution?
Well, we try to judge things in a more objective way. Judging from our experience in dealing with Israel, since we signed the peace treaty 30 years ago, we managed to get things rolling. And we signed the peace treaty, by the way, with Menachem Begin, who was considered one of the most hardliners in Israel. But yet, at least the man was honest, the man was objective, and we managed to strike an honest, objective deal with him, and we kept the peace so far. If we try to do this with this government, I don't think it is going to be very much acceptable anywhere. I don't think even it's acceptable in Israel itself. If you have Mr. Lieberman, for example, as a foreign minister, Mr. Lieberman talks about Annapolis as if it doesn't exist. Yet I don't want to talk about these marginal issues like Annapolis or the roadmap or anything. The man is talking about throwing out the Palestinians out of their territories. He's talking about throwing out even Israeli Palestinians, what we call the 1948 Palestinians. He wants to kick them out. Now, this is a non-starter for any kind of talks with this government.
But yet he says we do not want to rule the Palestinians as well. He seems to be open to that idea that we don't want to occupy, we don't want to keep them under Israeli rule either.
Yeah, but the contradiction here is that at the same time he's talking about not wanting to rule the Palestinians, he's talking about throwing them out of their territories. He's even talking about throwing out the Israeli Palestinians who are actually Israelis. They hold Israeli passports. Now, a man with that mentality, I don't want to give him that importance anyway, but a man with that mentality, with Mr. Netanyahu appointing him as foreign minister, I don't think this is a starter for any kind of talks, let alone a Palestinian state in which they very clearly said they will not allow to happen.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break here at Inside Story. Do stay with us. When we come back, the future of Israel's potential peace partner. What if, as we've heard, the Palestinian Authority threatens to dissolve itself? Back in a moment.